Good morning to everyone, and thank you for having me here at the conference this morning. It's always a pleasure to work with the Governor's Institute and Dr. McEwen and all the wonderful staff. Today, I'm going to be talking about the evolving substance use profile for adolescents. I'm going to try to fit in a bit of information and I'm going to try to move through some of the slides without bogging down too much in the data, but at the same time, talking about the trends that we're observing. So I'm going to talk about the longitudinal and current trends in substance use for adolescents. I'd like to also outline some important underlying principles in substance use for adolescents, and then move into talking about a few practicalities in interacting with adolescents in the clinical setting. So
Sorry to
what's
interrupt, Dr. Rennick.
adolescence?
We're not seeing your slides yet. You may have to try to share
Oh,
once more.
sorry. Why not? That work, Jeremy?
So you're moving in the right direction. You'll just go to your presenter view, and that should do the trick right there.
Are we good?
We are all set. Thanks so
All
much.
right. Sorry about that. Thank
Oh,
you.
no worries.
So this was just the objectives that I went over. And so in terms of defining adolescence, um, World Health Organization defines it as ages 10 to 19. It's significant because it's a period of change in terms of development, bridging adult and childhood. There are significant physiological and biological changes that occur throughout adolescence. There are also cognitive development changes, including, developing reasoning skills, rational thought, and so forth. It's a period of social and emotional growth and connecting with peers and navigating challenging social dynamics. Um, some divide adolescence into early, middle, and late stages. But for the purposes of these talks, we are talking about 10 to 19, and the data is going to focus mostly on a cohort of 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. Um, Prolonged adolescence is a concept that talks about basically extension of the changes that occur in adolescence into the 20s due to social and personal responsibilities and brain development. I think Dr. Shukla covered that in much more detail. So why talk about adolescent substance use? Well, it's and why is it important in society and not just in the clinical setting, but also in other places as well? Most adults with substance use disorder begin using their substances during adolescence. In 2021, 2.2 million US adolescents, 8.5% of them between the ages of 12 and 17, met criteria for a substance use disorder. Um, and by 12th grade, 32.6% of adolescents reported use in the past year. Um, and Unfortunately, in 2021, only 3.5% of the adolescents who had an illicit drug or alcohol use disorder received treatment. So, highlighting the importance of having these discussions because we really want to make a change there and increase access and availability of care for adolescents. Um, uh, in the first part of the talk, we'll take a look at the data trends in adolescent drug use for some of the key drugs. Um, and as we look at the graphs in the future slides, I'd like to bring your attention to three important themes that we'll be seeing in much of the data. These themes include the COVID-19 pandemic theme, which was marked by a substantial decline in adolescent drug use in the pandemic. Um, the second theme is going back a bit in time into the 1990s, where there was a nadir in adolescent drug use, and followed later by an increase in the mid 90s in drug use. And then the third sort of theme and that we're seeing here is what we call a cohort effect. So, and this will be evident in some of the slides. A cohort effect, it discusses a cohort of youth that were born around the same time, grouped by age. And that cohort tends to follow trends in terms of their drug use into the future. So, for example, someone who starts in eighth grade may have a certain trend starting that may follow them in 10th and 11th grade. Um, and there's some, reasons for these cohort-specific patterns of drug use, which, are not limited to, but include that cohort's risk of perceived risk of drug use, the changing uh, peer norms in terms of acceptability of drug use, and also changes in the social and legal status of drugs, and then the addictiveness of the drug itself. So, okay, let's take a look at some of the epidemiological trends here. This graph shows the percentage of students who had not used any drugs up to this point in their life. And it's a theme that will continue through these slides is the blue line represents eighth graders, the green line will always represent 10th graders, and the red line is 12th graders. Um, well, the good news we can see is that the number of abstainers, in other words, of those who are not using drugs, is trending up over time. Uh, you see the trend going up from 2017 to 2024. The other observation here is that certainly as adolescents grow through their adolescence period and go through their grades from 8th to 12th grade, you see an incredible rise in the number of students who use drugs, or in other words, a decrease in abstainers. Um, in 2024, the level of lifetime abstaining uh, increased in all grades and continued this multi-year trend upward. And those who reported abstaining were 72% in eighth grade, 58% in 10th grade, and 42% in 12th grade. This slide, sort of the reverse of that, it's showing the use of any illicit drug, which is a percentage of students who've engaged in the use of at least one type of illicit drug. And in 2024, the percentages of students who had ever used an illicit drug declined in all three grades. This is again reflects a similar pattern as the abstainers. We see a decrease across both time and a decrease in with the lower prevalence in the lower grades and higher prevalence in the higher grades. Um, In 2024, alcohol use significantly declined in all grades. The decreases in alcohol use continue a long-term overall decline that's taken place since the year 2000 in all three grades. And unlike most other drugs, alcohol use showed only a modest increase during the 1990s. A theme that we'll see as I mentioned earlier, is a rather robust rise in drug use between the early 90s and the mid 90s, but here we see that alcohol didn't quite follow that pattern, and showed a bit of a pause in its long-term decline, but nonetheless, going forward in time, we are at the lowest all-time levels. Drinking also decreased in adolescence, defined as having 5 or more drinks. Um, Marijuana also declined in the last few years. The substantial declines from 2020 to 2021 during the onset of the pandemic marked the first substantial change in marijuana prevalence in more than a decade. Previous to 2021, marijuana use levels had hovered without really any significant change. But today they're considerably lower and are near the historic lows of the nadir in the early 90s. Vaping is a relatively new mode for marijuana use. It differs from combustible use because vaping solutions come in a variety of flavors and higher concentrations of THC, and vaping is more readily concealable. And we've seen a rise in it after its introduction in 2017. But the 2024 percentage of students who vaped in the past 12 months trended slightly downward. And The large increases in marijuana vaping in the previous years were not consistent, and they were not accompanied by increases in overall marijuana use. That's important to mention. And that suggests that marijuana vaping is not increasing the number of adolescents who use marijuana. Rather, it's a substitute for the combustible marijuana use. Um, Any nicotine use was surveyed and indicated by the use of any of the following: vaping nicotine, cigarettes, cigars, flavored cigars, and cigarettes and cigars of different sizes, hookah, and smokeless tobacco. So any nicotine. And we see a decrease that was statistically significant in 2024. And today, most students use nicotine by vaping. And the 2024 decline in any nicotine use is driven in large part by decline in nicotine vaping, because that's the main source of nicotine use in adolescents today. The percentage of adolescents who had smoked a cigarette in the past 30 days declined in all age groups, and is fortunately the lowest ever recorded by the survey since it began tracking this in the 1970s. All of I should have mentioned this earlier, the data that I'm presenting to you is from a longitudinal study that monitors adolescent drug use. It's called Monitoring the Future, national survey results, and it is out of the Institute for Social Research at the University of Michigan. They've done a wonderful job trending this data. So uh, we were talking about vaping being the main source of use of nicotine in adolescence, and the percentage of students who vaped decreased in all grades for 2024, although not by much. And despite the recent declines in the use of nicotine vape by adolescent, it does remain one of the highest used substances among all of adolescents. If you look at the scale here, 100%, we're looking at, ranges in the 15 to 30%. And so it ranks in the 10th grade, for example, it ranks only behind alcohol and marijuana in terms of prevalence. Cocaine use, thankfully, it's trended down. You can see in the 80s to late mid 70s to late 80s, the cocaine grew in popularity and then plateaued at a high of about 12% among, sorry, about 18% among 12th graders. But then this was followed by a downward trend, um, and today it's lowest levels. It's a true success story in terms of the decrease in cocaine use, and it's been a wonderful trend. Uh, Crystal meth, lifetime prevalence has been less than 1%. And the small fluctuation on the graph is just because of low prevalence. It's never been higher than 5%, but right now it's at about less than 1%. Amphetamines, this is a percentage of students who used amphetamines without a doctor's prescription. Overall, the uses declined gradually and in the recent years, but it has declined substantially from its peak use in the early 80s. They began monitoring the 8th and 12th graders later in the length of in the life of the survey. So that's why we see the red line starting a bit earlier, and the use was significantly higher, but gone from a high of 32, 33% down to less than 5%. Adderall, non-medical use of it, not been significantly different, remains below 3%. Heroin lifetime use has always been relatively low, with the annual prevalence never really higher than 2%. Notice the graph here, the highest marking there is 10%. Um, uh, the increase in heroin use that occurred in the 1990s, which was the modest rise there, uh, was responded well to anti-heroin campaigns and Partners for Drug-Free America campaigns that are credited with bringing the number down again. Again, here we see the data for inhalants and hallucinogens. The trend is evident. I'm not going to go through every single number, but you can see that the trends follow a rather similar pattern. Here we see ecstasy, Molly, MDMA, with a higher level in the early 2000s and now down to lowest all-time levels. Sedatives, barbiturates, again, a decrease in trend, and which is promising. So we looked at several slides in terms of graphs and data, but what are some of the takeaway points in the key timeline and here? So for 2020 to 2021, the important point here is this is the COVID pandemic, right? As we were looking at the slides, there was always this rather dramatic change compared to other timelines right around the pandemic. And the survey used the pre-pandemic survey includes up to 2020, and then the post-pandemic data is reflected in the 2021 data points and afterwards. And many of the largest one-year declines ever recorded in these trends for adolescent drug use occurred in the pandemic. Some substance-specific trends, marijuana, nicotine, and alcohol all saw their largest decline with the COVID pandemic. And interestingly, of the top 10 prevalent drugs, there were record declines in 7 out of the 10 and 12th graders, and 9 out of 10 and 10th graders. Some of the less common drugs that I did not include in the slides, that many drugs were tracked significant decline simply because their prevalence was low. So what do we know so far?
Dr. Ramy, we lost your audio, I believe.
Jeremy, can you hear me now?
Yes, we got you back. Thank you.
Okay. All right, are we good to go?
All set.
All right, great. So I didn't touch anything. I don't know why that happened. So some of the changes we'd seen between 2020 and 2021 have persisted through 2024 in the recent years. Um, and so if these declines persist, what could this suggest? It could be indicating that a delayed initiation for that cohort that were in their adolescent years in for example, eighth grade or 10th grade in the pandemic, that delay in initiation could cause lower lifetime substance use trajectories. It could also be working by preventing adolescents to join, peer groups that are using drugs. It could also be that it's disrupting biological processes that favor and foster addiction. As we continue to go forward and observe these data points, if the drug use does rebound, then it may suggest that an easing of the pandemic and social distancing restrictions have driven would drive the levels to pre-pandemic levels again. And so it'll be really interesting to continue to follow these trends and these data. So I'd like to switch now. We've talked about some data and trends in substance use disorder in adolescence. I'd like to switch gears and now and talk about some important concepts and principles when caring for adolescents with substance use disorder. Um, and a lot of these principles and guidelines that I'll be discussing historically are built on a 2014 release that was Principles of Adolescent Use that was released by the National Institute on Drug Abuse by NIDA. And it outlined 13 principles. 4 years later, in 2018, this was expanded upon by summarizing evidence-based practices that aligned with the previous NIDA principles. And this was further revised in 2025 by incorporating new research and evidence-based principles and updating policy recommendations. This material was published in the Journal of American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry in February of this year. So principle one is identifying and addressing substance use as young as possible. One of the most important things we can do when it comes to adolescent substance use is to start early. Hey, Jeremy, can you hear me?
We lost your audio there briefly again. I've got your audio back. Your screen share is down. Okay, you're back up.
Um, Principle two, important to recognize that adolescents don't have to be addicted to benefit from substance use intervention. It's important to remember that addiction and substance use, we can think about it as a continuum, and not every adolescent who uses is necessarily diagnosed with full-blown addiction. So before getting to that stage, it can be very meaningful and helpful to intervene. Um, Principle three, substance use screening, comprehensive and assessment and treatment can be conducted across various settings. This builds a little bit more on principle one, which is talking about identifying it. And the important part about this principle three is that it can be conducted across different settings. For example, it doesn't have to be limited to specialty clinics. Screening and assessment and even treatment can and should take place in a wide range of settings, primary care settings, certainly interventions, and you'll hear more about this later in the talk, interventions at school and resources in the community can be helpful. Some of the telemedicine can be helpful for remote visits and to help accessibility for teens. And I was mentioning schools, for example, contingency management has been shown to be very effective when tied to academic performance in the school setting. Um, Sensitive issues should be addressed and confidentiality maintained. This is a really critical one. I will include a slide later on just for your reference about confidentiality in North Carolina. Confidentiality is state specific. It's important when working with adolescents, especially around substance use disorder and mental health. Confidentiality is not just a legal issue, it's an issue of trust and their ability to share their issues with us. In many states, they can legally consent to their own substance use treatment, and they're protected by federal confidentiality laws as well. There are exceptions to that if there's life in danger or certain guardianships that may exist legally may trump that. It can be a particularly sensitive issue, and it can be particularly challenging, especially when there are parents involved, and navigating that takes a bit of skill. But it's important to have the guiding principle that teens should be treated with confidentiality for substance use disorder. Should be tailored to the adolescent's need and should not just focus on substance use. The idea there being that we should treat the whole person in their environment. We should acknowledge if there's problems with school that could be affecting a teen's environment, and their surroundings play a large part in that, and not just focusing on the substance use. Certainly other medical conditions, sexually transmitted infections and so forth can go along with substance use. And so think that's important. I'm going to just show you the rest of these principles because in particular, later in the conference, we're going to have a little bit more on them in terms of family support and behavioral therapies. There'll be much more focus on that. But these are the 13 principles for adolescent substance use that are recently published this year. And along with those, the same group put out 5 practice-based evidences that include motivational interviewing, family-based services, behavioral therapies, pharmacotherapy, and continuing care and recovery monitoring. There will be more about these later in the talk as well, but the report that was put out included 13 principles and 5 practice guidelines. I included this here for you in the confidentiality in the state of North Carolina for reference. I do want to take just a moment and come back to one of the things that I'd mentioned in terms of screening. So, back to principle number 1, which was identify and address substance use early. How do we do that? Well, one of the ways is by screening. And the rationale for that is more than 3 in 4 adolescents see a primary care provider every year and have often trusting and longitudinal relationships with these providers. Screening can be very effective in that setting. It can also serve to normalize discussions about substance abuse with adolescents, and it can reinforce and promote healthy behaviors. It's an opportunity to teach them and guide interventions and to guide them in terms of behavior and to provide interventions and referrals for treatment. I wanted to include some examples. These 3 tools are the most commonly used in adolescent screening. They have all been validated for use in adolescents. By the way, the craft one here, it should be age 12 to 21. And they are easy to obtain, and they are effective tools. Craft is the most commonly used one. I've got some slides on 2 of these 3 just to show you an example here. Craft involves a part A and a part B, and how you respond to the first 3 questions determines the next step. If the first 3 are responded no, then part B, you just answer 1 question and go and end it there. If any of the first 3 questions are yes, then you complete the whole form. And it's scored, and it comes up with a risk level. And based on the risk level, there are recommendations. Another example is the screening to brief intervention tool, which has a similar setup. And if the first questions are answered never, then we stop there and progress through the full screening if there are indications. Again, it looks at stratifying risk and making recommendations for intervention. Excuse me. In the last, in closing here, we've talked a lot about data screening, trends, graphs, but I want to sort of bring the talk to its conclusion by taking just a minute and talking about something that's maybe a little bit, on the softer skill side, and it's not in hard to quantify in terms of a publication or a paper. And having worn two hats in terms of both a pediatrician and a physician now practices in substance abuse, I think these are some of the important principles that have helped me interact with adolescents. And I know they may seem uh, evident on the surface, but I think keeping them in mind is can provide for a very helpful and beneficial relationship. Respecting them, acknowledging what their problems are, not talking down to them, showing respect, acknowledging what their problems are, even if their problems are not the same as what our problems are or what our problems were when we were teenagers or adolescents. Being a little bit more curious and less judgmental goes a long way in terms of having them tell you information that can be very helpful and feel safe doing it. I like to reinforce with them that we're on the same team, we're on their team, and working together for this because I think at the end of the day, the most important thing is to keep them in treatment. And no good comes from people falling out of treatment. So a combination of these can help facilitate that. And I think it's in the words of my great colleague, Dr. Finch, it should feel like a dance, not a wrestle. I think that's true for all of our patient interactions, but especially with adolescents, you've got to somehow maintain the dance and not start wrestling with them. Um, Thank you for your time. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to respond to them in email later. I've got to head into clinic, but wanted to thank my colleague, Dr. Finch, and the Dr. Fuda and Dr. Madden, who are residents who are with us right now. It's been a pleasure to have residents and interact with them in our clinic.